Good afternoon again, and welcome to our webinar, Educate Your Staff to Help Deck the Halls, hosted by our Retail Solutions Coach and founder of VMID, Annie Nersessian. Annie has dedicated her career to helping retailers create a visual merchandising plan that increases sales and focuses on staff development. In today's webinar, Annie will share her tips on how to educate, empower, and engage your staff with visual merchandising, so you can ensure your retail presentation is always looking its best this season. Annie, take it away.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you everybody who is joining today, especially those of you who joined in last week's webinar as well as the on-site seminars at the Toronto Gift Fair. So if you have been a part of the presentations, you'll know that the topics are definitely focusing on visual merchandising. So in addition to understanding how it works, there's definitely a lot of opportunities and ways to better equip ourselves with stronger visual merchandising practices. It's really just a matter of breaking it down so that you know what's most effective and efficient for staff members specifically. So as Allison mentioned, I am the founder of VMID, which is basically a service company providing retailers and focusing on small businesses with resources so that they are able to both equip themselves with resources in terms of visual merchandising as well as revamp as needed. So that could be hands-on labor, consultations, sourcing help, staff training, all that sort of thing. It's just like having your own visual department, but as an on-needed basis, which is what makes it super small business friendly. So my background previous to VMID also includes working for a luxury retailer as well as working at corporate level for a sportswear company and teaching visual merchandising at Ryerson University. So in all these examples, I had to train others in visual merchandising as well as promote and inspire them to maintain the actual retail setups effectively from roles within the stores that may or may not actually have been visual merchandising roles, which is why the inspiration for this actual topic came about, especially understanding that we're heading into holiday season, or we are into actually holiday season, so there's really no time for setbacks at this point, which is why it's very, very important to really invest in the right training beforehand so you have the right engine running for your stores and your businesses during the highest selling season. So, as noted, we're going to talk about educating your staff to help deck the halls. So first what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a few photos that might make you probably as frustrated as I am by looking at these photos. There'll be various degrees of presentation faux pas. So, you know, these are not your stores, so it's pretty easy to put yourself in customer shoes and think about the impression you would get by seeing these examples. So what do you gather from the retailer? How established does this company look to you? And how tempted are you to actually shop from these sections? So in this example here, we really don't see much rhyme or reason or any particular theme. If I was to give it a theme, it kind of looks like there's a kids theme because of the types of products there are, but there's a little bit of home decor, a little bit of sleepwear, a little bit of accessories. So there's not particularly a strong story here. Another thing to note is there's no strong layout either. Everything's just kind of put, and it looks like where there's a gap, more products were put. So whoever worked on this wall kind of looks like they're just trying to fill up the wall with products, very desperately trying to decrease any gaps or emptiness through the wall without really thinking about a well thought out spacing. So this is not really a merchandise wall. Rather than if you start with actually planning the layout beforehand and really think about the products that belong together, you can really do a lot with this wall. So the person who worked on this maybe didn't have the right training, maybe they weren't motivated to really take the time, but we'll get to all of the reasons why this could be the case later on. In this example, and what's great to see is clearly it's not from anywhere around here, so that's good news for our local businesses. But again, it kind of looks like the person who worked on this was just focusing on simply filling the space on the table. It doesn't look like they really understand what zoning is about, and if you were part of the previous presentations, you would know what zoning means. If not, basically, look at it as a sort of department within your store. So each department has its own theme, its own function, helps customers to be able to put things together as a package. So whoever worked on this table might have not been aware of what zone this table belonged in, because there's definitely a mishmash of many different types of products that don't really belong together. It kind of is reminiscent of a garage sale. So really, if you just put products in places and hope that customers will sort of group things together in a logical sense on their own, you're really relying on their loyalty to your business too much, where you're expecting them to really give each product a chance and kind of figure it out for themselves. We don't want to do that. We want to inspire them and educate them on the items that belong together, so we're making their shopping experience easier and more pleasant. So in this example, the products are not put in the right context for customers. They're simply laid out. In this example, there's not much explaining that has to be done about why this would be a no-no. I don't think this is pleasant for anybody to shop through. And if you look at the back there, where the very back wall where you see the white, kind of aqua, black, and beige towels, obviously they are capable of folding nicely and there are standards in place. But with these mid-floor fixtures, those standards have not been implemented or maintained. Nobody would have a good time shopping out of this section or really think that any of these products have a high value because of the way that they're thrown around. So it could be because it's a sale section that, we kind of think customers will be more forgiving because it's a sale section and it's meant to look a little bit junkier compared to the regular priced items, but even sales sections have their limit. And if you really are counting on the price point being the only reason that a customer is shopping from your store, you're not really giving much credit to your actual products. So you do want to show that you honor and respect your products so that the customers will as well pay more value to them. So there's no time for this during the holidays. You have to have a process in place where anybody touching your store will know how to handle a bit better. So that means staff members maintaining easier, and let's remind ourselves that the messier it looks, the more customers feel welcome to mess it up even more. So if you're thinking a customer is going to mess it up no matter what, if you've presented it better, they're less likely to damage the presentation for you. So where do we begin with sites like these? Because of course we want to make sure that we don't see anything like that in our own businesses. What we need to do is make sure that all hands on deck need to know what to do. So even if you have a full-time visual merchandiser in your store, you cannot count on that one person to be maintaining and refreshing and replenishing your store, because they are not the only ones who are handling your goods. So anybody who touches your products needs to know why and how they maintain the visual presentation. So because of this, today we're going to talk about common problems, so the reasons why a lack of maintenance does exist in stores, so we can then talk about solutions to them. We'll talk about content to actually use as a little VM 101 presentation, basically, so that you are educating your staff members on what visual merchandising is to better equip and train them to do proper maintenance and presentation. We'll go over tools and guidelines that make it much easier to train and keep the standards high, as well as tips and tricks at the end. So starting with problems and solutions. The most common reasons why there are a lack of presentation standards are because, number one, there might be a lack of understanding why presentation matters by the staff members. Number two, maybe they don't understand how to maintain the presentation while they do mean well. Maybe they have a lack of awareness of their visual merchandising responsibilities because they assume it's not within their scope of responsibility. And lastly, they might just not be motivated, even if they do know better. So how do we tackle these? The root of the problems. Number one, if they don't understand why presentation matters, that's because they don't understand the impact and role that visual merchandising has on a business. It's really important when you're teaching somebody what to do and not to do for them to understand the why. That way, if they forget what you've told them, if they understand the why, they will be more likely to understand what is required of them. So it's super important for everyone in the store to understand the role of visual merchandising on a business. It's not just a luxury. It's not about looking prettier. It is all about being able to sell more. Secondly, if they don't understand how to maintain properly, that means they don't have the right training and standards to make it easy and feasible. You might be hiring somebody who comes from VM training in the past, and you might have somebody who hasn't had any training, but regardless, the standards can be very different from retailer to retailer, so it is important to really get the right training in place for your standards specifically. The lack of awareness of VM responsibilities might be simply because they are unsure of what to do because their role hasn't quite been clarified, or perhaps they're too shy to ask for clarification. And lastly, if they're not feeling motivated on their own, it could be a combination of them not understanding the impact of VM, which is why they're not motivated. They don't really give it much credit. And as well, they might not have had the right training and standards, which makes it feel like it's a very overwhelming and intimidating task because they don't really understand how to do it. So how do we tackle each of these common problems? If they don't understand why presentation matters and they don't understand the impact of VM, obviously they need to be explained what visual merchandising is and its impact on the business. And we're going to get into the content and what to teach about this later on. The second solution is to really invest in staff training, and that includes tools and guidelines. So you might have a full day meeting going over everything. You can't just assume that they're going to remember everything you said, no matter how many hours you spend on it from that one day. But if you have tools and guidelines in place, that's a really great and efficient way not only to train new staff members, but also to refresh older staff members who might have gotten a little bit rusty along the way. It's also showing how serious you are about the standards by having these items actually built out for you. If they're unsure of their VM responsibilities, empower and give them ownership. So yes, you can tell them what the responsibilities are, but what I've noticed in the past is if you give somebody additional responsibilities or new projects, it often excites them and motivates them to want to do better. In my past world, what we noticed is sometimes giving somebody tasks who might be a salesperson, so they assume that their role is going to be all sales. Once they were given VM roles, a lot of them who had never done VM before didn't even notice before that they actually loved the visual merchandising field, and it really inspired them to do better in it, and they ended up excelling as the top visual merchandisers. So you never know what talent might be hidden in your existing staff members. Empower them, give them a little experiment with new projects, and give them ownership, and you'll see how much people really rise to the expectations. And to motivate them, show them their results. So instead of just telling them what to do and yourself seeing the results, if something is going well, it's very motivating when you tell that person, after you set up this table, this is how much our sales increased. Or, look at the table now, it's completely shopped over. That's a great sign because it means you inspired customers to actually shop after you set the table up. So by showing them the results and the positivity behind their work, they'll be more likely to want to continue that because they'll feel proud of their work. So the content, as mentioned, it's really important for people to understand what visual merchandising is and what it does. So while maybe I'm a little bit biased in this field, but I can definitely talk about it all day, we're going to have a little session here on what visual merchandising is so that you are provided with the content to then relay this to your staff members so that they understand it on a fuller scope. So visual merchandising these are common points that a lot of people know, but it does include making merchandise look good, making selling spaces pretty, creating and styling display areas, as well as moving fixtures around. So this is what a lot of people will say on their own, what visual merchandising is, but there really is much, much more to it than this. That's what I mean by it's not just a luxury. Visual merchandising describes the presentation of merchandise to highlight its function and reason to buy to a consumer considering a purchase. It creates an engaging, enjoyable atmosphere which invites customers to spend more time in the space and increases potential turnover. So basically, some items are very obvious. Let's use a vase as an example. We all know what the function of a vase is, but what reason are you giving customers for them to be buying your particular vase? What features are there about this vase that they wouldn't know themselves? Same way that you'd speak to them verbally as a salesperson, there are ways that you can show this in visual presentation too. So is there a particular beautiful color in the vase that you can further highlight by placing it against contrasting colors? Is there a special design feature that wouldn't be shown if you didn't have this vase showcased effectively? Is it made a specific way or used with a special material that really has to be highlighted, either in presentation or with signage involved? What should be highlighted? What are the statement pieces that would bring a customer's attention to this section? So it's really important to highlight the function, even if you think it's obvious, but all of the reasons that a customer should purchase that particular one by putting it in the right context as well. So the way you curate products together also educates customers on how it can be used and pieced together, also inspiring them to buy more. And that's how you increase turnover potential. Visual merchandising is also about strategic product placement. So placing merchandise thoughtfully to entice customers to explore, purchase items, purchase more items, and keep the state fresh and relevant. This is a booth design example, so as you can see, it's actually a very small space. And if you take a closer look, all they're selling is actually stationery, which can be very traditional and boring. You might think a card or a little, piece of stationery is just what it is. Like, what is there to show about it? But in this small space, the designer of this booth has created interesting moments within each wall and within each area of the wall, so that when you are standing in there, you are being invited to explore and understand each type of product in a more interesting way. So this is how you can create more exploration. You can't just put your stock in its place for the sake of having it out there. You really do have to create exploration, because this is how you are getting the most out of having a physical space that you've clearly already invested in. VM is also about strategic path manipulation, so consciously placing furniture and fixturing and product groupings in a way that manipulates a customer's path. Think about a maze as an example. You are basically creating a maze with the type of floor plan and space planning that you create with your fixtures. So you can manipulate how you want your customers to walk based on the placement of your fixtures. If you have everything really tall and bulky right up at the front, you might be creating a wall where customers don't feel welcome to walk in further. If you start with shorter fixtures in the middle and leading up to taller ones, you're creating open sight lines so they are able to see everything. So it's really important to think about how a customer navigates the store, how you want them to navigate the store, and how you can set up your fixtures in a way that they feel welcome to explore further. So using this photo as an example, they have several visual pulls here. Starting with the grouping of mannequins, that's clearly a strong display area that would charm a customer by showing what types of products and styles that they can get from the store. It's also a little bit angled so that the bus forms are facing the customer as if to be hosting them. Next, we see another visual area that has, I'd say, like a large panel with some side hanging apparel and a table with curated accessories to style up the side hung items. This is the next visual pull. It's also angled, so it's kind of creating like an arrow, like an entry point for a customer to walk in and through this area where they're interested to see the next section over. If you look towards the back, there's another panel with a lifestyle image and side hung area. So all of these areas have a very special visual aspect to them. It's not just about having product there for the sake of having product there, which creates visual pulls. That way, when a customer walks up to an area that they find interesting within their site, they have another reason to walk to the next section. That's why it's really important to also manipulate their path, not just with the maze of fixtures, but with the visual pulls so that you're drawing them in further and further as they go in. Visual merchandising is also a support for business needs. So it's a support to the business needs of the store by taking advantage of easy sellers while helping slower sellers. It's very, very important. I'm sure all of you already know this, to understand what your top best-selling products are, as well as what your poorest selling products are, and you can use these as your advantage. So first, I welcome you to pull the top 5 or 10 items that do the best for you and see where they're placed in the store. If they're placed in the most visible areas, for example, windows, key visual areas, faced out in the most prominent sections, it might be selling well for you because you've positioned it somewhere very impactful. While if it's not somewhere very visible and it's doing well, imagine how much more productive it can be for you if you do put it somewhere more prominent, so you're making it even more productive for you. And then take a look at your poorest sellers. If there's somewhere that is not very visible, and you might find that sometimes you realize something might be in your stockroom even, and that's why it's not selling well for you. Obviously, it's just a matter of having it somewhere more prominent so it's seen better. But if it's still a poor seller and you do have it somewhere very prominent or in one of your more visually focal areas, that means it might not be the way you've placed it. It might be that the product is just not popular right now. So it doesn't really make sense to give it such key real estate for something that's not doing well for your business. And this way, by seeing where your key visual areas are, where the most visible areas are, and seeing your top and poorest sellers, you can really be strategic about making your spaces much more productive for you. VM is also about promoting turnover. So it is a function to sustain a store by effectively rotating in new arrivals and strategizing goods. I'm sure you don't want to hold on to the same old, stale, aging products, and customers definitely don't want to keep coming back if they're going to be looking at the same products week to week, month on month, ongoing, forever. That's why it's really important to have a specific VM process in place where you are promoting more product turnover to clear out as much stock as possible to get the older items out of the way, so you're always carving out room for new arrivals. And there's definitely ways to cheat around this as well. So even if you're not getting new items in, you can still rotate your store so the customers perceive as if you have something new to be looking at, even if it's just a little bit more hidden before. But it is important to promote that healthy stock turnover so that it's out with the old and in with the new. Visual merchandising should help the ease of shopping. So it is the helpful organization of a store that allows customers to shop easily. Now, the terms we're going to use on this floor plan are definitely not professional terms at all, but we're going to kind of speak to the way a customer thinks. So pretending this is a store that we have to work with, what customers see right away are obviously the window displays because that's right from outside. So that's where they are expecting to see the special offering. And it's really important to make notes of what these zones look like in your own store so that you're making the most of your space. When they walk through the doors, the first section they see directly in front of them are the items that they immediately need to purchase. These are the most special items, new arrivals, items of focus, and that's because they're going to see this above all the rest of the items. So your priority should be based on the actual visibility by customers. Next sections over would be immediately to the left or the right, so the second special offering would be pictured here. It's important to note where your cash desk is because that's typically where you'd put POP items, so items that customers can add on to their purchase, accessories, small items that are just really easy to add on to their transactions. So would consider this our Add Me On section. So that should always be near the cash desk. Also take a look at your least visible sections where they're going to be going anyways. So that's the you'll come here anyway section. And that doesn't mean that they're going to go there on their own. It means you have to give them a reason for them to be going there on their own. So it might be the bulk of your accessory destinations. It could be your sales section. But because that's where customers make the most effort to walk to, since it's the furthest away, you do want to put items there that they will come here looking for anyways. So this is how you can organize your store in a very logical way, considering how customers are expecting your store to be broken down, so that you're making their shopping experience much easier. And this might make sense by looking at a foreign store because it's not your store, and in that case you are the customer. It's a little bit trickier to do this with your own retail spaces when you're kind of used to seeing them every day, so you really have to break out of that and put on a stranger's glasses and take a look at your store in an unbiased perspective. The number one goal of visual merchandising should always be strategically setting up a space to sell. So it could be selling the product, it could be selling the brand. Selling doesn't have to mean that you're money hungry to do a good job at visual merchandising, but it's very important to note that this is the main objective of visual merchandising, which is why it's important to really understand it so you are using it as an effective tool for your business. It's the biggest indicator of how successful the visual merchandising is by basing the results on the actual sales. Visual merchandising can be very subjective, but all decisions should, at the end of the day, be based on being customer-focused, sales-focused as the root of visual merchandising decisions. The effects of promoting a visual merchandising culture are, first of all, sustaining your actual presentation. So with a strong visual merchandising culture in place, that means ensuring that the visual setup of your space can actually be sustained with customer shopping behaviors. So if one customer walks through the doors and shops, it shouldn't be a chaotic presentation right after that. It should somehow be able to sustain what your shoppers regularly shop like. And that's why if you enter a high-end luxury designer store, presentation can be much more delicate and still be maintained compared to a high fashion store, as an example, because there's a much higher product turnover, so that would have to be bossed up more to actually be able to hold the customer's shopping behaviors. Next, it would be promoting flawless execution. So by having a strong visual merchandising culture, you'd be able to actually set up flawlessly, or as close to flawlessly as possible. You would also be promoting consistency, so reflecting the brand image across all channels. What we mean by all channels means if you have multiple locations, or you might just have one store location but you might be online, or you might only be online but sometimes appear in trade shows. Whatever your channels mean for you, it's important to have that consistency within your brand image, and you can do this by having visual merchandising standards in place. And that's because if you don't do this, you're basically starting your brand image from scratch each time instead of creating that familiar look. It's like having a logo and then changing your logo depending which location it is or which show you're at. You do want to have that familiar logo, same way that you should have certain visual merchandising standards in place no matter where you're showing. VM also promotes positive KPI impacts, meaning key performance indicators. And that includes UPT, so units per transaction. By inspiring more purchases, you are inspiring your customers to buy more items. Conversion, which means for every 100 or even 10 people that actually walk into your store, how many people are actually buying something? If they're interested and they walk in, clearly there's potential there. If they're not buying, they might not be feeling encouraged or motivated to shop, and that's what we need to look at when it comes to visual merchandising. It also promotes overall profitable results through visually appealing retail spaces. A proper VM culture also promotes inspiration, so influencing customer shopping behavior to enable them to make quick purchase decisions. And that's why it's important to romance your products for them, not just assuming that they're going to see the value in them on their own, putting them in the right context for customers, so you're inspiring them to make those purchases and give value to your brand. as well as educating. So educating the customers about the products or services in an effective, efficient, and creative manner. The same way they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, that's what visual merchandising is. You might have 10 salespeople there, but you can't rely on your salespeople to do all of the speaking and selling to a customer, rather than also having a visual merchandising plan in place where a customer can see and understand for themselves at a glance because of the way you've placed that item. So it's an effective, efficient, and creative manner, and that way the customer is also relying on their own perception and giving it more credit for wanting to buy that item rather than thinking that the salesperson is simply trying to convince them to shop. The responsibilities of a visual merchandiser. And the reason that I like to go over this is because I strongly believe in using our resources the way they're intended to be used. So if you have a visual merchandiser or you hire one, outsource one, whatever the case is, don't waste their labor hours on things like stocking or receiving goods when you likely have other people who can take over those responsibilities. If you have this person in place for you, let them focus on what they're actually specializing in, which is the actual planning of the space, layout, styling, and staging your items. So encourage more of their hours to go towards actually overseeing and managing the visual presentation in your store, understanding the assortment to best promote it, setting up the store sales floor with seasonal merchandise, setting and ensuring the retail standards of the store are in place, and training and communicating to the store team, as well as problem solving. So as you can see, all of these items can take up a lot of your time, which is important not to just absorb everything by a single person and still expect them to wear many other hats. To have a strong visual merchandising process in place, it's important to designate who is doing what and really taking ownership of those tasks. Here is a typical role of a visual merchandiser, and that's not to say that you have to follow this role model, but there is a reason why we're going over this. So quite typically, the in-store visual merchandiser would be reporting to the store manager, same way that the stock team would and the sales team would, but they would all be working with each other because, of course, the in-store VM needs to understand the health of the sales, what's going on, where there are opportunities to improve, as well as the stock that's coming in and out so they know what they have to work with. The reason why they report to the store manager but might be taking direction from either the owner or senior management is because each in-store VM, if there are multiple locations, should not just be thinking about that location. They should definitely think about the neighborhood and specific target market of that location, but it's still important to think about the overarching brand image of the business so that there is consistency from location to location. And that's why quite typically there is the owner or senior manager, however the business is broken out, who is actually overseeing all the VM placements across the channels in all locations. So even if you only have 2 staff members in your store, it's still important to basically note that the VM should be thinking about the overarching brand image and not just that particular store. So that, again, same concept as the logo design that we went over a little while ago. There should be that familiarity about the way that the store has been set up. So now that we know what visual merchandising is, and that might be a lot of information, that's not to say that everybody in the store has to follow this. It just means this is what visual merchandising does, and whoever is in charge of visual merchandising should be aware of the certain strategies they can use, as well as what the responsibilities are. But now we're going to talk about tools and guidelines that will be helpful for everybody who touches your products in your store, again, to be able to refresh their memories and their training of it, as well as using these as efficient tools for proper VM cultures in your businesses. So the first one is very, very kind of common, and it's simply having weekly meetings. It's really important to do a walkthrough with your VM. Again, when I say VM, it could be somebody designated for visual merchandising, or it could be a salesperson that you've given this special task to. But it's very important to go over what the current focus is. So what are we really focusing on, giving top priority to, so that they understand that those zones and those products should be maintained above the rest of the store. Typically, it's prioritized, again, based on customer visibility. The best sellers should also be known so that those are put to good use as a tool for benefiting the space of the store. New arrivals should definitely be known as well, because a VM should always know what the newest items are to really give those prominent presence, so returning customers have more motivation to continue coming in for new items. And they should definitely understand the intent of each zone. If any staff member doesn't understand what each zone of your space consists of, that means when they have something coming back as a return from a customer, or they have new arrivals, they're not going to know where to put it, and they're going to put it somewhere that it might not make sense, and as a result, your whole store turns into chaos rather than having an organized zone system that you had originally intended to have. Another handy suggestion for your training or tools are to have an initial refresher workshop. So when you do have new staff members, it's highly recommended to show them physically, turn it into a workshop in terms of how you want your products to be presented and what principles to follow with step-by-step instructions. Have it hands-on, because this is a very effective way of them remembering, and make it fun. So you can turn it into a race or a competition. Who can do the best job of this? Who can do it the fastest? That way it's very, very memorable. And you don't only have to do this at the very beginning. You might find that your staff is getting a little bit rusty. You need to do a refresher halfway through the year or once a year. Whatever the case is, this is a very effective way of training your staff. Standards guidelines are also very important. Even if you only have one location, don't assume you don't need this. So standards guidelines can be just a simple booklet of creating how-to visual breakdowns. So these are all tools that VMID does create for their clients. And a booklet like this would show how to display each type of product or each type of product in each zone, how many of each, so going over the specific unit count for consistency, highlighting specific do's and don'ts that you think are going to be an issue, as well as going over the details of finessing so that all the standards are very nice and crisp and clean. So this is very visual, and that's really important. Nobody's going to read a huge paragraph, but if you have it visually laid out, it's much more impactful. A zone plan is also important, so understanding the homes of each type of category in your store, but definitely dissecting further so that they're not questioning where items go. It's much clearer for them to understand where each type of product belongs. Again, that's both for bringing a return back from a customer, as well as being able to receive new arrivals. Because if you don't do this and your whole store gets scrambled from different staff members putting things in different places, that's a much larger project for you to then go back and reorganize and clean everything up, rather than if you had been maintaining properly to begin with. It's also important for them to understand the functions of each home. So not just where the specific categories are, but if they understand where a launch zone is, where the add-on items are, where the sale section is, where the secondary focus is, by giving them this much detail, it then gives them analytical skills. So if they're not quite sure, they can use their judgment, and it will actually make logical sense so that they are able to put something back, even if you're not there to tell them how to do it. So this is much more effective than counting on yourself to be present to supervise all the time. Daily and weekly checklists are also very handy. So if there are items, even if you think they're very obvious, like checking for dust balls, it's very effective to have this on a daily checklist, and then have a separate one for a weekly checklist, which makes it much more feasible for them to remember what they need to do every day, and also kind of makes it fun to check off their tasks as they get them done. Everybody likes checking off tasks. Having a VM schedule, so even if it's not very specific, you might say, I can't plan this too far in advance because I might decide to have a sale in a few days. That's fine, but if your staff members kind of know what their schedule would look like in terms of visual merchandising, it would be more likely that they're actually going to implement those expectations. So as an example, Mondays, the store is typically a little more chaotic than usual after the weekend selling. So you can call it the weekend refresh day, where you're cleaning up, as well as going through a walkthrough to talk about what plans you have during that week and what your focuses will be. On the Tuesday, because it's a little bit of a quieter day typically, that could be your focus refresh. So what are your most focal areas and how are you going to refresh them, or are you changing the focus altogether? So that could be your starting from scratch VM day. Thursday can be weekend prep, knowing that the days coming up are going to be full-on selling time. You got to be out of the customer's way so they can just shop, and shop. So Thursday will be when you're actually prepping for the weekend. So these are very just common tasks that you'll need to do throughout the week. But if you have designated days, you'll know that your staff members will know to expect that on those days. And lastly, tips and tricks. These are basically just from my experiences, both with working with, again, salespeople who were expected to maintain more than they were used to, or visual merchandisers that we had to train from scratch, or students who didn't know anything about visual merchandising and they were being equipped to be able to become visual merchandisers. So there's a lot of ways we did this by having games in place, having training processes, monthly games, regular conference calls, even photo feedback. But what's very highly recommended is, first, you have to keep in mind that you're dealing with different personalities. So everybody might have a different way of being able to understand or be motivated to do their tasks. But it does work well when they understand the why of everything so that they do feel empowered to make their own decisions. See them as trainees becoming trainers. So instead of having everybody as your trainee, select people who have grown a little bit more in this field and make them your trainers. So it's basically like spreading the word and making it a little bit more contagious because they're passing on the wisdom. Make it fun, of course, because they are your employees, so you do want to make sure that they're still engaged. Give ownership per area. So you might find that you're going to put one person in charge of accessories, another person in charge of the furniture area, or however your store is broken down. But if you have specific person per areas, they might feel a bit more empowered and competitive even to maintain their specific areas because they are then in charge of them. Praise good work more often than criticizing. It's very easy to notice things when they're not going well, much more than when they're going. So if something's not going well or if it's not to your standard, it's much easier to notice that rather than if something looks good. And that's definitely true for visual merchandising, but it's really important to keep in mind, praise good work more often than you criticize, and put it in a very constructive way when you are criticizing. And that's how you do encourage the positive results to continue rather than discouraging from somebody who feels like they're failing all the time. And empower them with information. You will be empowering them by giving them such key information about your business, by telling them how the sales are doing. They will feel more significant to your business by having visibility to this and feeling like they have more impact on that. Hire well, of course, and with whoever you have in your stores currently, test out their skills so you never know who might be a hidden visual merchandising star. Give them small tasks to do and see how strong they are in those areas. Visual merchandisers or somebody who would be good at visual merchandising have certain personality traits that are pretty common, which include being creative yet commercial. So it's not all about just being creative and looking like a gallery, because you do want to be showing off your products at the end of the day. Somebody who's understanding, hardworking, analytical, detail-oriented, and engaging. And it's important to be engaging because you do want their care for visual merchandising to be contagious with others as well. So 'tis the season for impatient customers, which is why it's really important to get ahead of the craze. Make sure that your salespeople are equipped to be able to deal with it and to help ease the pain of the season. When you have window shopping as an example to deal with, you might have a lot of shoppers that are simply looking but not buying. If you have the right training and visual merchandising in place, you will be encouraging actual exploration, which results in more actual shopping. To ease frustrated shoppers, the proper visual merchandising will mean a more pleasant experience in a stressful time. To deal with blindness, so customers not really seeing the products and seeing a store full of products but feeling like there's nothing there for them. With proper VM, you will be showing and showcasing products more effectively, and that's why it's important to do so. Ease the pain of devaluing. So again, when there are poor standards in place and your store is not being maintained, it really does devalue your brand and your image. So it's important to increase perceived quality and the value of goods, as well as avoiding one-hit shopping. So everybody wants returning customers. You spent all that time convincing them to become a shopper. It'd be nice to actually continue that momentum and have them continue coming back. So by having a pleasant, easy shopping experience, that means they'll have a positive impression and a reason to return above other environments in a competitive way. So this is why it's really important to get ahead of the craze and have the right VM system in place to be able to ease the pain of the season. Computer's frozen. And remember that visual merchandising is a retail engine. You want to steer it properly, use it to your advantage by making sure you have the right resources, training, tools, and guidelines within your team. So thank you to everybody who joined this call and this webinar. I hope that it was useful for you and that it sort of inspired on how to tackle your training and how to kind of feel better about dealing with, multiple personalities and skill sets and levels of professionalism. If you do have any questions, feel free to pass them along, and it'd be our pleasure to answer them. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much, and good luck with the holiday season.